Welcome to this presentation where I will talk about the research that we have been doing in prognostics and health management. I will give a brief overview of the most important works that we have published and that we have done with the industry so far. My name is Marcia Batista. I'm from the Air Transport and Operations Group of TU Delft, and I hope you have a good time. So, talking a little bit more about me, introducing myself, I'm an assistant professor at TU Delft for 2 years now. I did my bachelor and master's at the University of Lisbon, Portugal, and my PhD was on machine learning and deep learning of different aeronautical equipment. You can contact me through this email address if you want to collaborate with us or do some work like PhD with us. Definition of prognostics in health management. So I will talk about prognostics in health management, even though the focus of our research is prognostics, which is a subfield of prognostics and health management. But what is PHM? PHM is a maintenance framework, meaning it's a collection of technologies that aims to manage the health condition of different critical and complex equipment. In PHM, we can see three fundamental dimensions: the health management dimension, which takes care of how to define the sensors for the prognostics and health management. You also have the diagnostics dimension, which cares about isolating the fault, understanding what caused the fault and the impact of the fault on the neighborhooding systems. And we have prognostics, which deals more with understanding when an event of failure will occur in the future. So it has a temporal dimension to it. Prognostics versus diagnostics. Sometimes the line is a little bit blurred, but remaining useful life is the target of prognostics. So we are trying to define how much time left we have until the failure event. Diagnostics, in contrast, is worried about the detection of the event. So today, will it happen or not? And if it will happen, which component is most likely to be the cause of it, and what's the impact of that failure in the enclosing system? As I said, we mostly focus on prognostics and the remaining useful life estimation. But what is the rule? What is the remaining useful life? The remaining useful life can be defined as the number of working cycles or the time left at a particular operating time. So if you see this chart of a temperature versus time, you can have several measures, which are the little balls, the little dark circles, and at that moment you can extrapolate when will the progression of the measurements go. And if you know the deadline of the temperature, that tells you that you are close to a critical event, you can do something like this. And then you can extrapolate or estimate or predict the end of life time. The rule is nothing much than the difference between the current time and the estimated time of the end of life. Of course, the rule can be predicted at different times, so we don't have just one rule, but we have different rules that we aim to predict. The data that we deal with is cross-sectional time series data or panel data, in which you have information of several units of several equipment and their measurements, different perspectives over the same degradation over time. So it's quite the most complex data type that you can deal with. In terms of case studies, we typically do PHM for aircraft systems. So, for instance, structures is not our focus. We don't usually do structural health monitoring, but we have expertise in systems such as the engine, the bearings, the engine bleed system, and the batteries of drones. And for all of those systems, we try to apply simulated data whenever we have a more experimental concept. When we have a more developed concept, we apply it to industrial data. Because we work in prognostics, it is important to define our vision. And our vision is that prognostics is not only just the models, because it's very unlikely that you get good results if you input the data as it is into a model and hope for the best predictions. We see it more as something that needs to be pre-processed in terms of data, that needs to be input into a model, more or less complex according to the scenario, and then you post-process the predictions that come out of the model. So first, pre-processing, you pre-process the data, then you use a model to generate predictions, and the post-processing is about optimizing and understanding the predictions that come out from the model. So 3 steps. In this presentation, I will talk about our works in each of these steps. For example, the pre-processing has, as we will see, several sub-steps, such as the defining the operational conditions and the removal of their impact, the denoising, the detection of the elbow point, and feature engineering. And we do this usually sequentially. Some authors will use, for example, the operational conditions but not the denoising. Some authors will focus on elbow point detection, but the best possible model will come out when the data is pre-processed in all of these perspectives. We have worked in each of these stages, and I will talk briefly about each of the works that we have been doing. One of the most important things in pre-processing the data is to identify the operational conditions to which the system is subject to. So operational conditions are all the factors, environmental or operating-wise, that affect the normal operation of your system. The first thing that we usually do to identify operational conditions is to identify the flight stages to which the system are subject to. So, for instance, the cruise is very much different in terms of signals from the climb, and that doesn't mean that the degradation is worse or better, because most probably the degradation is the same because you are in the same flight, but the signals change quite a lot. And in that circumstances, the first thing that you want to establish is to identify the factors that influence the operational conditions, such as, for instance, in the case of the flight stages, the altitude and the Mach number, for example. We did some work on flight stage identification, and the idea basically is to have a signal of an altitude signature of one flight, and to identify the different flight stages at the different altitudes and at the different stages. We did this with a clustering-based algorithm that received the altitude and the time and calculated the flight stage. You may ask, but does the airplanes nowadays don't have this kind of information already? Well, they do have, but sometimes we want to distinguish a cruise that is at a higher altitude than another because the regimes might be different in terms of operational conditions. So it might be useful to have this kind of algorithms that look at signals such as this one. This is actual real data from KLM, and that do things like this. An identification of the different flight stages. One operational condition is a perfect situation to look at the signals. It's situations when we have signals such as this, in which you first see a linear degradation followed by an exponential degradation. And then this is a more clear pattern that you can use to extrapolate the rule and to estimate when the failure is going to occur. When you have more than one operational condition, such as 2 operational conditions, signals may be more messed up, and it's more difficult to find a clear pattern of degradation. Such is the case of the CMAPS data, in which you have signals such as this. So each plot is a sensor signal of the same engine, and you can see that there's not actually a trend in the data from the beginning until the end of life of the equipment. So, what do we do with this kind of data? Well, we proposed a neural network, actually 2 neural networks, to solve and address this problem in an unsupervised manner that we published in Neurocomputing in 2021. And the system does something like this. It looks at the temperature, for example, the temperature 24, but it could be a pressure or vibration no, but pressure that had this kind of signals. And you can see the system operating on the signals. After identifying the conditions, it starts to collapse them into a more a signal with a more clear degradation pattern. Denoising is another preprocessing step that is very important, because even if you take the effects of the operational conditions like we've shown, you still need to take out the noisy data, the noisy outliers. And in that case, you can employ different strategies. We worked with 2 strategies. The first one is just to denoise the data using a generative adversarial network. And the second technique that we utilized so far is to increase the monotonicity of the signal, yielding a signal that is monotonic in the end. Why we do this to the signals? We do this in the hope that in the end the system, the model, is able to better understand the degradation patterns and to yield a better estimate over the lifetime of the equipment. These are the work that we did. You can find more information on these links. And we should also talk about elbow point detection, which is another preprocessing step. This was a work in which we basically thought, well, the system, the signal, has any kind of signal of the system has 2 parts, the linear and the exponential part. What if we just use the exponential part because it's the more aggravating the degradation stage, and we forgot about the linear part before what we call the elbow point? We found out that in a work in 2020 that doing this yielded better and more accurate rule estimates. Feature engineering is something that we do in almost all our works. It's mostly to create or to transform existing features into features that resemble more degradation. So I'll show you an example of some functions, statistical ones, that we used in a conference paper in 2020. The average amplitude, the standard deviation of the signal, the skewness coefficient, the margin factor, and so on. Modeling approach. After we preprocess the data, we need to put it inside a model. All models in prognostics require some kind of data, some more than others. The data-driven is the most intensive model in terms of data, but also the most generalizable. And it usually resorts to artificial intelligence techniques such as neural networks. Physics of failure models are models that try to model the first principles of the system And hybrid models combine the philosophy of both the data-driven and the physics of failure. For example, you could have a neural network that inside the network has an equation, such as the Paris law. In that case, that is an hybrid model. Data-driven models. I will talk not extensively about digital twins or hybrid models yet, but I will give an explanation of the idea of a data-driven model. So a data-driven model starts with data, and you usually need two kinds of data. Data of the failure events and sensor data. And then you preprocess the data, especially the sensor data, and you get a preprocessed data set. That data set should be divided into two, one which we call the testing data set and the other the training data set. The testing data set should have information about the sensor data only, even if you can, and you should be able to calculate the rules for each row of your sensor data. But the training data should have information about the sensor data and about the rules. With this training data and these two relationships, the rules and the sensor data, you can create a model, and you can use the testing data to check if your predictions are good or not. And then you can do some kind of post-preprocessing on the predictions, and then perform an evaluation based on some hidden test set rules. Okay? So this is more or less how the system works in data-driven. Hybrid models that are based on neural networks also work a little bit like this. Digital twins are a little bit different. Anyway, maybe because the data-driven models are the most popular ones, we thought it would make sense to explain this in more detail. Post-processing. So after you have your predictions, so you have rules, so 49, 47, 40 days to failure, and so on. You have an array of predictions. You can do some post-processing on them. What do I mean by this? I mean, you can optimize the predictions, first of all. You can evaluate them to see if your model is actually good or not. And you can try to explain the predictions. I will talk a little bit about each of the steps next. Optimizing the predictions. Sometimes you have an equipment, such as the one represented here, and you have predictions about that system. So you go from the beginning of life to the end of life. And what happens is that you have different models here. So each model has a line, has a different color. And what you see here is that the predictions, especially the green-yellow predictions, are dispersed. So they are scattered all over. And there's not the concept of dependence in the predictions that we would like to see. In this work, what we did was we linearized the predictions, or at least we increased the dependency between the predictions with a common filter solution in this 2019 paper. Regarding the evaluation, it's always important to evaluate your model to be sure that you actually have a good model, not just on the training data, but also on the testing data that was never seen. But usually, and in the beginning, what people did was they used metrics such as statistical metric of mean absolute error or root mean squared error. And those metrics are sometimes not the best to see all the dimensions of the model. So here you see three plots. The first plot with scattered predictions, the second one with over predictions, and the third one with under predictions. We have, with the same eye, we don't know which case is who. So it's very obscure to just look at the eye. So you need to visualize performance in different ways. And that is one of the works that we have done here at TU Delft with the master thesis from 2021. In terms of interpretability, usually the most difficult models to interpret are the machine learning models, so the data-driven models. Why? Because you just receive a prediction of 50 days to failure and you don't know why. You basically just receive that information and nothing else. So what we worked on was on using things such as the SHAP model to obtain predictions, to obtain explanations related to the predictions. So whenever you have a prediction of 50 or 40 or whatever, you can call the SHAP model and it can tell you things like this, such as the temperature was 20% decisive to come up with this prediction, and the vibration was very, very important, 80% important to be exact, to have this prediction of the rule. So it gives you a notion of what goes inside the model. To finalize, I would like to thank the research team that is working with us at TU Delft, the 2 PhD students that are currently working with us, Thomas and Christopas, the past master students, and a special thank you to my past advisors, work colleagues, and also the head of the section, Bruno Santos. So I hope you have enjoyed the video, and see you next video.